The government could take away the worst year of your life. Everyone he knew had let them. What none of them could tell him anymore was what they'd given away to forget it. The offer was the same for everyone. The government could erase the worst year of your life and give you a perfect life in return. The year it took was the one that made you. That was all they told you. It was all most people needed to hear. He was one of the last people in the city who hadn't signed. The clerk was kind about it, never pushed, never warned. Most people, she said, just decided when they were ready. He already knew which year they'd take. He'd known since the first time they offered. It was the year he'd watched his father die, the year he'd spent beside a bed that seemed to get bigger as the man in it got smaller. On his way home, he passed a man he knew, kneeling in front of a crying child. The man was gentle, patient, present. He said all the right, soft things, and he couldn't reach it. Whatever was breaking that child's heart, he quieted the sound of it without once touching the cause, the way you comfort a stranger's kid in a checkout line. It wasn't coldness. It was a love-shaped hole where a year used to be. On the wall behind him, in the open doorway, a clean, pale rectangle marked where a photograph had hung and been taken down and not been missed. For a while, he only envied them. The neighbor who'd gone years without sleeping now woke rested every morning, like it was nothing. The woman 2 doors down, who used to hold herself like she was bracing for a blow that never came, was simply calm now, all the way through. A couple who'd circled each other like strangers for years were laughing over breakfast again. One of them told him, no agenda at all, that he hadn't had a bad night since he signed. He'd see them at the market, unhurried, picking through the fruit like the afternoon was a thing they had plenty of. He'd see them stop on the sidewalk to watch nothing in particular, the way only people with nothing sitting on them ever do. He hadn't slept properly in a year. He carried his father's last months into every quiet moment of the day. The room, the machines, the weight of a hand that kept getting lighter. Some nights the grief wasn't even sharp anymore, just heavy and constant, and his and no one else in the city carried anything like it. He started to understand, those weeks, why they'd all said yes. He knew what his own days looked like from the outside, because lately he'd started watching himself the way he watched them. He ate standing up. He kept the radio on in the empty kitchen, so the quiet had something to push against. He answered his phone on the second ring, so no one would think to ask if he was all right. From the outside, he probably looked fine. From the outside, everyone did. Some mornings he caught himself doing the arithmetic of it. How many hours of that year he was still carrying, alone, with no one to spell him. The grief had stopped being a wound. It was just a weight now, one he lifted every day. He was so tired. He could have set it down for good, and no one alive could have told him he was wrong to. Some nights he got as far as uncapping the pen. Then he'd put it back in the drawer with the form and tell himself he'd feel differently in the morning. And most mornings he almost did. But the longer he watched them, the more he kept catching something he couldn't name. He asked a neighbor, once, about her late husband. An ordinary question, the kind you ask to be kind. She smiled, warm and untroubled, and reached for half a second toward a wall where a frame used to hang, then didn't finish the reach, because there was nothing there to finish it for. She wasn't sad. That was the part he couldn't stop seeing. There was nothing left in her for the sadness to hold on to. A man stood easy at a graveside, reading a name off the stone like he was seeing it for the first time. A woman told him she loved her sister and couldn't say why, only that she did, the way you know a fact you were told once. He couldn't have said what was gone from them, only that something was, and that he might be seeing absence where they saw peace. He'd taken one of the forms home. He wasn't supposed to. Some nights, at 3 a.m, he'd sit with it at the kitchen table, read the one blank line, year to be removed, and let himself imagine setting the whole thing down. On the worst of those nights, he wanted to. His mother had signed. She'd nursed his father through that same year, the two of them trading shifts at the bed, learning the machines, holding the man up between them until there was nothing left to hold. When the government offered to take the worst year of her life, she gave them that one. She was happy now, genuinely. He couldn't pretend she wasn't. He went to see her. She was warm, glad of him, easy in a way she hadn't been in years. He mentioned his father, a bad joke the man used to make, the kind of memory you hand someone so you can both hold it a second. She smiled the way you smile at a stranger's kind story about someone you never met. She never stopped loving his father. She just no longer remembers the year when that love cost her the most. On the wall behind her, where the photograph of the two of them used to hang, there was a clean, pale rectangle, and she followed his eyes to it and saw only empty paint. She asked him, gently, the way you'd offer someone a chair, whether he was finally thinking of signing too. She meant it as a kindness. That was the worst of it. She meant it as a kindness. The anniversary came in the spring, the way it always did. He knew the date before he opened his eyes. He didn't mark it on a calendar. He didn't need to. He made coffee and left half of it. He went to work and came home early. All day people asked him ordinary things, what time the meeting was, whether he'd seen the weather, what he was doing that weekend. He answered all of it, easily. No one asked why he was quiet. He wasn't, particularly. No one knew what day it was. There was no one left in the city who could. At lunch, someone held a door for him and wished him a good weekend. He said it back. It was, he supposed, a perfectly good weekend to everyone but him. That evening he did what he did every year, let himself go back, for 1 hour, into the room, the machines, the last morning. Except this year there was no one to sit in it beside him. His mother had given the day away. They all had. That was the thing that finally moved him. Not the grief itself, but the loneliness of being the last one still carrying it. He'd stopped trying to explain it to anyone. There was no one left who'd lost the way he had. A grief no one can reach stops being grief after a while. It just becomes the thing that makes you strange. He hadn't planned to go that night. He'd walked past the office 100 times and never once turned in. But the apartment was very quiet, and the form was still in the drawer where he'd left it, and at some point, standing in the kitchen with his coat still on, he simply didn't take it off. He went to the office at closing. The clerk was kind, the way she'd always been. She slid the form across the counter. He picked up the pen, and it wasn't fear that moved his hand. It was tiredness, a year of it. The simple wish to set down something he'd carried alone too long. He held the pen over the blank line. He almost wrote it, and then, with the pen an inch off the paper, a question arrived that he'd never once let himself ask. For a moment he didn't ask anything at all. He looked at the blank line, and then past it, at nothing. He'd spent a year certain he wanted the whole of it gone, every hour, every machine, every last morning. Now that it was one signature away, he found he wanted to know exactly what he was handing over. He'd never once asked. He wasn't sure anyone did. He asked the clerk the one thing he'd been avoiding. Not what it would cost. What, exactly, would be gone. So it takes the pain. You don't lose the pain. Then what do I lose? The year. He didn't say what he understood. He didn't need to. He thought about his mother's wall, the clean, pale square where a photograph used to be, and the way she'd smiled at his father's name like a kind stranger. He looked down at the blank line a last time. Then he set the pen back on the counter beside it and left it blank. He went home. The last thing between him and the trade had never been the pain. It was a photograph on his wall. His father, mid-laugh, some ordinary day, the kind of picture his mother's wall no longer had. He stood in front of it a while. He didn't take it down. The next morning looked like every morning in the city. The bright square, the easy, unhurried faces, the calm banner with its single blank line, waiting for anyone who was ready. He walked out into it the same as always, still carrying the weight none of them carried. Only now he knew what it was for. Everyone he passed had given away their worst year. He kept his. He was the only one left who could still be broken by it. And the only one who still knew what he'd have lost. Would you give up the worst year of your life if it was also the year you loved most?